C'est en direct.
Good evening. So we're very happy to be with you again tonight. It's the session number 4 of our CALVADOS Drouin Educational. So tonight with you, as you can see, I'm with my father Christian, and the topic of the day is aging, our advantages and the history of the company. So we're going to go back in time when my grandfather founded the company, and I will let my father explain you all this rich history.
Okay, good evening. Well, we are in 2020, so my father started 60 years ago in 1960. Well, it's a quite special story. His idea was not to start a CALVADOS business. His idea was to buy a country house, to spend weekends and small vacation in an area that he liked a lot, close to Honfleur, not far from Deauville, Pont-l'Évêque, and he found a small farm and decided to buy it. Then he realized very quickly that there were plenty of apple trees in the orchard, and he had to do something with the apple. Well, he thought of different possibilities, but finally decided to make CALVADOS from them, just what the farmer before was doing, because at that time every farmer was producing cider and CALVADOS. So as the idea was not exactly what people were doing at that time, selling primarily inexpensive CALVADOS for café Calva and bistro. His idea was to produce a very high quality CALVADOS, build an inventory of old CALVADOS, and then he would have enough CALVADOS in stock, and he would have a little bit of time. He would start a small company from that. The problem is, after close to 20 years, he had plenty of CALVADOS. Every barn of the property was full of barrels till the roof, and he had no time. So I will make the story short, but I was living in Canada at that time with my wife. Guillaume was born there, his sister too, and we had to make the decision to come back to Normandy and start a small company from the inventory of high quality CALVADOS that my father had distilled over close to 20 years, but without any customers. Nobody was aware of that production, so that was quite a challenge. I came back in mid-1979, and we were at that time in Gonneville-sur-Honfleur, where the property still is. Guillaume lived there, and I can show you well, this is the factory. So, and this is, okay, that was, we started in a half timber building, flat roof, and my father has no background in producing CALVADOS, but he was really good at hiring the best people. So he hired 2 key persons, Pierre Pivet. Pierre Pivet was the 3rd generation of distiller. Grandfather, father and himself were going from farm to farm and distilling cider for farmers. He was close to retire, and everybody told my father that he was the best distiller in Pays d'Auge. My father met Pierre Pivet and explained his project, and Pierre Pivet was very interested in this project. So he told him, if you want to start this project with me, you are the expert. What you need, you ask me, you will get it. I will ask you only one thing, to bring me medals in Calvados competition. This is the beginning of the story of medals.
So, you know what I always find really fascinating and interesting about Pierre Pivet is that his job was a mobile distiller. So his activity was actually for many years to stop in every farm. He was going from farm to farm during the season of distillation, stopping in the farm for a few days or a few weeks, the time to distill the cider of the farmers, and then moving to the next farm. And so Pierre Pivet still was a mobile still. And we still have it here in the farm. It's not in use anymore. It's officially retired 3 years ago. But it has worked for 70 years in total. And it was a really good still. And it's still with a super history.
Yeah, and Pierre Pivet was very famous in Pays d'Auge. One magazine called him Mozart, the Mozart of the steel. And he was a very clever man and explaining, a good teacher too. I learned a lot from him because he was explaining everything. Why he was doing that and why he was doing that and why the steel should be that shape and what if we have to repair it, what we should do. He was very, very he was a very good teacher, I should say. The other key man was Marius Duchemin. Marius Duchemin was the cooper in Honfleur. And so when my father started, he asked him to supply the barrel, the cask for aging Calvados. And Marius Duchemin advised him, he said, okay, I think you should have a certain percentage of former port and sherry cask. Not only they are cheap, but the experience showed that they are good to age Calvados. And so part of the stock was aged rather than finished in second-hand port and sherry cask, also some Madeira cask. And that was the tradition in Normandy. The farmers were in a position not far from Le Havre to buy second-hand barrel coming from all over the world because product imported at the time were imported in bulk in barrels, bottled in Le Havre, Rouen, Paris, Bercy, and then the empty barrels were for sale at cheap price. But if you had a good cooper, he was able to supply you with high-quality barrels. And so when I arrived in '79, I had, of course, a number of challenges. One was to sell Calvados. It was a difficult one. The other one was to keep the quality at a very high level. The inventory that my father has built was exceptional. In addition to the production every year, we also bought some batches of old Calvados from farmers who had finished the production, retired or dead. So I had an inventory of high quality product. I have to maintain the quality, I have to find customers and also to communicate.
Maybe we should mention that one of the good ideas my grandfather had was that he didn't blend his Calvados and he kept every year separately in the cask. And that was not something that was done at that time.
No, that was not done. Normally farmers, well, every year, we have the angel share. So each barrel loses a little bit of Calvados. And the tradition was to refill the Calvados to complete it with a young Calvados. So my father never did that. He kept each barrel separately and never blended anything. So when I started, a couple of liquor stores asked me, do you sell vintages? Are they allowed? I had no idea. I was not selling vintages and I had no idea whether that was allowed or not. I called Bureau des Calvados and they told me, yes, you can, as long as you can prove that 100% of the product was distilled in the specific year mentioned on the label. But you're in a very special situation because the entire stock that your father has built can be sold with a vintage because we get every month the inventory declaration, and we can see that nothing has been blended. So if you want, we'll come to your place, we will recognize all the barrels, you will start a separate accounting to be able to sell vintages, and you can sell the entire stock with the vintages. So that was the beginning of something unique, because that was not a tradition in Normandy. In Normandy, they had the same barrel that started maybe 30, 40, 60 years ago. But in fact, they were not able to sell it with a vintage because they were completing every year the loss, what was evaporated from the barrels. So that was a key thing. Something unique, not totally unique, but almost. And in the beginning of what make one of our specificities, this very extensive range of vintage dated Calvados. I maintained the tradition, and then I realized that I tried to sell to restaurants in Normandy at the beginning, to hotels, to stores, but it was extremely difficult because nobody was waiting for me. They had traditional suppliers, and it was so difficult to sell a single bottle. Yesterday I was just cleaning all the archive, and I found the first invoice of the owner of a restaurant who bought a Magnum. So we always remember that man because that was my first customer. Very, very difficult. In the same time, as I realized that my colleagues were very happy in Normandy and not really pushing any export to other countries. They were exporting a little bit, but very little, less than I think 17% or something like that was exported at that time. So for me, I spent 10 years abroad, Iran, Canada, and from there traveling in many countries. I decided to do a special effort on export markets. And this is why today we export somewhere between 70 and 80% of our production in more than 50 countries. But at that time, nobody was really interested in exporting Calvados. Calvados was consumed mostly in the northwest part of France. A little bit of export to Germany, Switzerland, and Belgium, our neighbors. But outside of that, that was extremely limited. So we also had an opportunity with a neighbor to launch a new product, very attractive for consumers who had no idea what Calvados is. It's a pomme prisonnière. So I started that in 1980. It's an apple grown in the bottle. There were on the market pears grown in the bottle because it's not that difficult to grow a pear. But an apple is very difficult. So I'm not going to tell you the story of that apple because it's a very long story, but we started with a very small number of apple, and one of the famous stores at that time in Paris, Ediard, was very attracted by the packaging and asked us to supply him whatever we could produce on an exclusive basis for 2 years, which we did. And this product helped us a lot to enter into markets in Asia, in Far East, in countries. The first Calvados shipped officially to Taiwan was this one, to Korea was this one, even to mainland China in quite a long time ago. And in Japan, this product is very famous. People love this product. So, new product, export market, vintage collection. We built the company on that.
The challenge, you know, was maybe that Calvados had to come to out of its border at that time. Most of the Calvados was drunk in a cup of coffee, and most of it was drunk in Normandy or Paris.
Yeah.
or eventually some bordering countries like Belgium, Germany,
Switzerland too.
Switzerland. But so yeah, the challenge was actually to make it live again as an historical spirit, because Calvados is 500 years old,
Yeah.
almost, and it has been in its history a very famous spirit with very big volumes at the 18th century. So it has a gorgeous personality, it has a unique style, but it's just demanded also a bit of communication, explanations, and also maybe working hard and levering the level of quality.
That's true. Very few people know that Calvados was the most famous spirit exported from France in the 17th century. So successful on the north of Europe that cognac people were terribly frustrated and obtained, to protect their own interest, from our King Louis XIV in 1713, a regulation forbidding the sale of Calvados outside of the area of production, outside of Normandy and Brittany. So this product, which was selling better than cognac during the 17th century, all of a sudden had to be consumed in Normandy. So for the farmers, no problem, they drank everything. From the morning to the evening, you know, added to coffee. But that was the end of Calvados as an international product. The regulation was cancelled after the French Revolution, 1790-91, I'm not remember exactly the year of the cancellation, immediately after the revolution. But that was too late, there were no more commercial network. And during the 19th century, okay, Calvados was enjoying a good consumption in the northwest part of France, but all of a sudden, with phylloxera, and around that started around 1860. No more wine, no more cognac, and everybody was looking for alcohol, and cider and Calvados became extremely successful. So the volumes increased tremendously. All the farmers planted new apple trees, created a school to learn how to produce, and but unfortunately the sales were so easy that they produced a lot of very bad quality, and instead they killed the product. So we had to wait for a long time. We had to wait till the late Bureau de Calvados was created in '69, and at that time that was the end of Café Calva, and the producers realized that they have to do something if they wanted to remain alive. So they created Bureau de Calvados. They improved a lot the quality, but it took a lot of time. And when I remember one thing, when I met La Tour d'Argent in '85. In '85, I met the sommelier, and he told me, well, I'm ashamed of what I have. Under the trolley, there were 2 bottles of very cheap Calvados. He said, nobody's asking for Calvados, but he tasted some of our vintage. He was very excited, and I got an order from La Tour d'Argent. And 5 years later, I came back to La Tour d'Argent, and the sommelier told me, very excited, you will be pleased. This year we sold more Calvados than cognac. So the quality could be exceptional, equal to the best spirit in the world, but of course we had to communicate about that. And there was almost nothing on the Calvados. When I came back to France, I wanted to read books about Calvados, but there was no book. So I decided to write the first one, Grand Livre des Calvados, which was published in '87, and then I published others. And very recently, last month, we published in Japan, we were a Japanese publisher, Calvados book, that's the first book on Calvados published in Japanese. And what was a lot of work. But it seems to be very successful because on Amazon, three days ago it was #5 as bestseller in wine and spirit books, and they were out of stock yesterday, and they have a new stock today. So we have to communicate. To not only we have to introduce the product, to organize tasting, to organize seminars, to organize to show to consumers what CALVADOS is, because very few know, and we also have to write about it, to explain how to consume it. It's a very, very versatile product that you can consume many ways. Now in 2004, Guillaume joined me. I was the first one with a proper background to produce something, engineering agriculture, enologist, and in 2013 we appointed him the chief executive officer, so now he is the boss. But I'm still flying all over the world, well, not the last 2 months, everything has been cancelled, to explain what CALVADOS is, to introduce it to consumers, and but now we also today we want to speak on history, want to speak on vintages, and I've explained that my main interest in the aging was the use of barrels, but I was in a tradition, so I use primarily port and sherry cask to build structure, to produce CALVADOS with a lot of body, complexity.
Yeah, and by the way, Jared, a question from Jared for Guillaume or Christian. What is the hardest part of making CALVADOS versus making a grape brandy like cognac? Is it the fermentation, the aging, the consumer knowledges? What is the main difference, and what is the hardest for you to do?
Probably on the fruits, because there are many similarities between cognac and Calvados. Double distillation for Pays d'Auge Calvados, it's the same process in cognac. The aging can be quite similar, even though in cognac they tend to be more classic with only new oak or cask that has only been used for cognac, and we use cask for more origins. But I think the main difference is the fruits, because we work with more than 200 different varieties of apples, which is quite a challenge, but also a super opportunity to bring complexity in the spirit.
Yeah, that's true. That's true, because brandy, they don't smell the grape. So CALVADOS, the apple, delivers something more. And we can build with apples incredible complexity. CALVADOS age over 15 years old. If you do a chromatography analysis, you find out more than 150 different aromas. In a 25 years old CALVADOS, you find out more than 250 different aromas. Well, at least this is what the laboratory of SAQ, the monopoly in Quebec, told me, because they can afford that kind of analysis, which is very expensive. Now, when Guillaume came, he wanted to experiment more thing in the aging. He's quite proud of the 69, 70, playing with sherry barrels and port barrels. But Guillaume had worked in vineyards, and he wanted to. He's going to explain to you what he did. He wanted to do more experiences which were not in the tradition in Normandy, but which happened to be extremely interesting.
I think something important to remember is that vintages was always something very central in our estate. My grandfather built the first stock of the vintages, as we said earlier, and it has always been a big part of our reputation, because well, we're the only company to offer such an extensive range. We have, I think right now, 37 or 38 different vintages available. The oldest is from 1939, and we have almost every year from 58 to 2000. Now the idea is not to offer a vintage for offering a year only. What we like doing is, we think if someone comes here and want to find a super Calvados, we want him to find a bottle which is made for him. And every vintage is different. We really work the vintages in a way that they will all show a unique personality. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing is to realize that the Calvados that will be used for vintages are usually not the same as those that are blended early in the aging process. When we want to make a very old Calvados, we tend to distill old ciders. This will lead to a young Calvados with more aggressivity, higher acidity, but more complexity and a better potential for very long aging. Then we will usually start the aging in quite a slow process, using rather old cask, because we know these Calvados are made for a long aging, so we don't want to let the oak overtake the fruit of the vintage. So we'll go for slow aging for all the first years. And then usually what we do is when the vintage gets around 15 years, we start to taste it more carefully again, because we start selling the vintages when they get 20 years old. So when they get 15, it's time to wonder, is this going to be a good vintage and how can I really improve it to make it exceptional? And so by tasting the vintage, we wonder what is the cask that is going to bring the extra complexity to that vintage. And some vintage can be very light and fruity, and we will try to use a cask that will respect this delicate character. It can be a Sauternes cask, or it can be a Revisade cask. Sometimes we have vintages that have more power, complexity, and then a sherry cask would be perfect. And so we really try to adapt to the style of the vintage every time. Just as examples, I've just taken out some bottles of the range. So just to show you, this is probably the first time you see these bottles. That's the new packaging we have designed for the vintages. So they will very soon be on the market. For the moment, they are still in the cellar. And this is actually the way the bottles are still at the moment. 2000 is the new vintage of the year. It was distilled in 2000, aged in oak casks since now. And we have done the last year of aging of these Calvados in a Tokai cask. So the Tokai cask was actually at first an idea from our importer in Hungary. But I was very happy he suggested it, because I was always curious to see what the result would be, and I was pretty sure it would be interesting. And it's a super vintage. It's very straightforward. We have a lot of fruit, and the Tokai has broad flavors like dry fruits, raisins, dry apricot. So this kind of a flavor. It's a very interesting vintage. I've just picked a few years that I find interesting myself, but 1995 was partly aged in port cask. So as my father said earlier, port was something my grandfather was already doing, and that my father has used a lot. We use port cask in some of our blends, like the VSOP, the XO. Sometimes we use a small proportion of these casks in the blend. And the port cask, they bring this rancio style with ripe fruit flavors. They are very interesting. While port casks were giving very good result, I wondered, would we get good result with a similar kind of wine but from France? And we started experimenting Banyuls cask nearly 15 years ago now. And the result was also very interesting. Port cask is probably a bit smoother in style than Banyuls cask, which are a bit more, the tannins are a bit more tight probably with the Banyuls cask. But the Banyuls cask gives a lot of very ripe red fruits. So it's very interesting for that. 1990 is more of a classic aging. I was aged in a lot of traditional Calvados cask, and also the use of some cognac cask. So it's a great vintage, very flowery with vanilla flavors. It's also very interesting. So You know, the range is very big. You know, I could spend hours talking about all these different vintages. We have very interesting sherry cask aging, like 89, which was awarded 3 years ago, the World Best Calvados at the World Mints Award. This is a bottle, I think, which is very interesting because that's an experimentation my father did.
Yeah.
I think it was more than 25 years ago.
Yeah. It's a Calvados which was aged half in port and half in sherry. So maybe it has lost a little bit of fruitiness, but it has an incredible body, structure, complexity, smoothness, and well, that's definitely one of my favorite. We kept it more than 4 years, more than 2 years in each type of barrel during the aging. So a lot of influence, much more than finishing. It has acquired a lot from those barrels, and that's the kind of taste that the people in England enjoy a lot. The Scandinavian, for instance, like more the fruitiness. The American, the English, they like something which is rounder, smoother. There's different type of Calvados. You see that they like that type. They like that type. It's the Italian, for instance, for a long time, their favorite was 74, and I remember our importer. La Bellier, Le Calvagano, organized a tasting Calvados and cigar. When Calvados not only from us but also from many producers. And the 74 finished #1. And I got an interview. I was invited to go to Roma to a long interview from Rai TV. And all the Italians coming here, we give them taste of different vintages, and they were all attracted by the 74. But they had no knowledge of that before, just blind testing. So you can see, and if you see, we know more or less what the consumers who really like the old stuff, the complex stuff, what they will prefer depending on their nationality. And,
it's really actually part of the game here. Like if someone comes at the distillery and want to find a good bottle, we're trying to catch his taste. So you know we're gonna give him the possibility to taste a few different Calvados going in different direction, and then considering what he likes or not. Then because we know the range of the vintages, at the end we'll try to catch the perfect bottle for him.
yeah.
Another point I like to mention about the way we age the vintages is that we actually don't do finishes on the vintages. We use a certain kind of cask during the aging process. We usually do that when the Calvados is between 15 and 20 years. But we will just let the Calvados, like in the Tokai cask, we've just let the Calvados in the cask for a few months. But when we get this feeling that, okay, this cask has given enough of it, and we don't want to lose the fruity character, we don't want to lose the fact that we're drinking a Calvados. So then we take it out, and then the Calvados is put back into either old cask, and the flavors that was given by the specific cask will continue to change year after year in the time. And that's something very interesting because we make small bottlings every year. So the 1970 that you taste now is different than the one that was bottled 5 years ago, and even more from 10 years ago.
This is the reason why we have to taste every barrel at least once a year. So we have something like 2,000 barrels to test. We share the job. And because we have to see what's going on in the barrel. The barrel is aging, the barrel is changing itself, the content is changing. So we have to make a decision every year whether we keep the product in that barrel, whether we have to move it, whether we keep the barrel for something else, or whether we have to destroy the barrel because it's dying. So the aging is extremely important. Well, each step of the process, the production process is important. The aging, of course, is a key step in the production of complex Calvados here. And you have to follow each of your barrels quite closely. I mean, it's funny. We write notes every year to see what's going on, and we look at what we wrote the previous 2 or 3 years, and then we make the decision whether we keep it in that barrel, whether we move it to another one, whether it should go into a blend because it's not good for vintage, or whether we keep it for vintage.
Thank you. We have a question from Jaroslav. What is the biggest market for Calvados in general, and what is the biggest market for Christian Drouin Calvados especially? If you could point 3 countries.
So the first market for Calvados is France, both for Christian Drouin and for Calvados in general. But out of France, if we speak about Calvados, I think Germany in volume is still the biggest.
Not in value.
But not in value. Yeah, the 3 main markets for Calvados at the moment in value are the US, Japan, Belgium, I think. For us, for Christian Drouin, our first market at the moment is Russia. The second market is Japan, and Russia and Japan are about the same size, and then come the US. So maybe to conclude this session on the vintages, I would just like to show you what is the good way to enjoy an old Calvados like this. You know, Calvados likes to be in contact with air. We like to aerate the Calvados during the aging, but we also like to aerate the Calvados in the glass, but this has to be done very gently.
Yeah,
So, yeah, don't shake your glass, because if you shake the glass of the Calvados, you're just gonna burn your nose with a lot of very alcoholic vapors. So, what I like doing is I just gently turn the glass, and then you wait and you watch the tears. When you see the tears halfway down, like just now, then you slowly bring it to your nose and you can smell it. And that's how you get all the complexity of this Calvados. Now, I always like to say that the only way to taste such an old Calvados is to have 2 hours with you and a good friend. Because this Calvados is going to tell you stories for hours.
Guillaume, see tears. I rather see legs.
And so, yeah, it's very important to take your time. Don't drink it too quickly. If you come back to a glass like this every 10-15 minutes, you might find out that there's a new Calvados in your glass every time. So I hope everybody had a good time tonight. We
hope to see you soon. 2 months to be confined 2 months now, it's a bit long.
So, well, enjoy this time to drink all the good Calvados that you have at home. We hope you will feel like discovering better the range of our vintages and all the diversity that is in this range. Well, good night, everybody. And I will meet you again next Thursday, and on Thursday next week we will talk about Le Gin.